Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Debrief on ABC News Live. I'm Kimberly Brooks. Thanks so much for joining us. Big night number 2. We're back in Detroit for the Democratic debates, and new disturbing reports out from the ACLU about the crisis at the border. And we're checking out the future of eSports with an all-girls team. But first, here are your headlines.
Witnesses are describing the terrifying moments when a Walmart employee opened fire inside a store near Memphis. The suspect killed 2 co-workers before being wounded by police in South Haven, Mississippi. He now faces 2 counts of murder. Investigators say the gunman was recently suspended for showing a knife to a fellow employee. The 2 people killed have been identified as the store manager and a 16-year-old employee. A police officer was also wounded, but he was saved by his bulletproof vest.
Prosecutors will seek the death penalty in the murder of a former Arkansas state senator. Linda Collins was found stabbed to death outside her home in May. According to court documents, investigators say suspect Rebecca O'Donnell removed security cameras from Collins' home.
A Delta Airlines pilot now accused of trying to fly drunk.
37-year-old Delta Airlines pilot Gabriel Lyle Schroeder was supposed to fly from Minneapolis to San Diego Tuesday morning. But officials at the Minneapolis airport say before the pilot went through security, he noticed TSA agents were conducting additional screening. He then removed himself from the line. Agents reporting this to police. Schroeder arrested after police ran 2 sobriety checks.
We're in the Galapagos.
We went to the Galapagos. It was a bucket list trip.
It was a perfect trip until the last night when the boat caught on fire. All hell broke loose. Smoke filled the boat. They told us there was a fire in the engine room.
We then did have to jump off from the back of the boat. Once we got on the life raft, I knew we were going to be safe. They transported us from the life raft to the boat that answered our SOS.
We began in Detroit yesterday, the first night of the second Democratic primary debate. 10 candidates with top contenders Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren taking center stage. So take a look at some of the action.
With bad policies like Medicare for all, free everything, and impossible promises that'll turn off independent voters and get Trump reelected.
You're wrong. Healthcare is a human right, not a privilege. I believe that. I will fight for that.
Why do we got to be the party of taking something away from people?
No, we are the Democrats. We are not about trying to take away health care from anyone. That's what the Republicans are trying to do. And we should stop using Republican talking points in order to talk with each other about how to best provide that health care.
You don't know that, Second of all,
we'll come to you in a second,
I do know, and I wrote the damn bill.
If we embrace a far-left agenda, they're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists. If we embrace a conservative agenda, you know what they're going to do? They're going to say we're a bunch of crazy socialists.
If you think any of this wonkiness is going to deal with this dark psychic force of the collectivized hatred that this president is bringing up in this country, then I'm afraid that the Democrats are going to see some very dark days.
Yeah, so it got a little heated there. I want to bring in our Maggie Rulli to give us the rundown. Maggie, good to see you again. It seems like health care was the biggest battle last night.
Hey, Kimberly. Yeah, I love hearing that rundown. It did get a little feisty. And like you mentioned, as expected, healthcare, one of the #1 top priorities for Democrats. It came up first last night. And also, as expected, are the 2 progressive powerhouses on stage, Senator Bernie Sanders and Senator Elizabeth Warren. They really had a united front on this. They stood together talking about Medicare for all. They backed each other's plans. Also, as expected, the other 8 on stage sort of ripped into it a little bit. And we heard some of former Congressman John Delaney just now calling out Bernie Sanders' plan. They got tested. They didn't really come to a united front. We heard some other Democrats call for sort of more of a Medicare for all who want it plan. So right now, Kimberly, bottom line is that healthcare is a huge issue. There are plans on the table, but there's a lot of them, and the Democrats don't seem to have a united front on this issue.
Yeah, and so who on the wings of that stage do you feel like really had a moment last night?
Yeah, well, Kimberly, it's interesting. I needed to sort of outsource on this one. I talked to a bunch of our political team here on the ground. They were listening to every word last night. A couple of people they mentioned to me, they said one was former Congressman John Delaney. We heard him there kind of going after Sanders and Warren on health care. He had a lot of airtime last night, more than his team was even expecting. His team says it's a good thing. We're cautioned, though. We don't know how all that extra airtime is going to play with voters just yet, but he definitely dominated on the stage. I also got some words in for Mayor Pete Buttigieg. He really stayed on message. He stayed on point, sort of stayed above the fray. All brought things back to how are we going to beat Donald Trump? How are we going to stay united as Democrats? And this last one that was mentioned to me, a little bit of a curveball, was Marianne Williamson. We heard her at the very end during that mashup. You know, she came out with some flowery language. They got a lot of applause, though. She mentioned those dark psychic forces. She kind of called everyone else on stage out for their wonkiness. Do with that what you will, but it got a lot of play online. It's been trending on Twitter. Will it be enough to get her to those magic numbers she's going to need to make to the third debate? Some of our experts are saying it may have edged her there, but it's sort of insignificant numbers, but still interesting to watch.
All right, well, we shall see. Maggie, really right there in Detroit, thank you so much. And one name we didn't hear once last night was frontrunner Joe Biden. But all eyes are on the stage again for part 2, a new round of 10 candidates, including Biden and Kamala Harris. So I want to bring in Zareen Shah, who covers the Harris campaign, and Chris Donato, who covers the Biden campaign. Just want to ask you, Chris, did Joe Biden watch the debates last night, and how is he prepping for the debate today? Do we have him with us?
So Chris is just about to be with us, but the question is, how
So I want to go to
Zareen.
Zareen.
No, he watched.
Zareen, are you there? I'm going to ask you about Kamala and how she's prepping for the debate tonight, if you're with us right now. Zareen?
Yeah, Kimberly, I can hear you. Kamala last night, she was definitely prepping. We know her husband was tweeting about the fact that she was. We've been asked if she'd have another big moment. It's really unclear right now. I mean, she is known for these big moments. She had a big one last time. You've seen her in the Senate grilling Bill Barr, Brett Kavanaugh, Jeff Sessions. I've also seen her debating back in California when she was running for her Senate seat against Loretta Sanchez. She's known for these big moments. She's known to be a big preparer. So that's certainly something we think that she's doing right now. And let us see just what she comes up with tonight.
And Chris, you're with us now. I heard that Joe Biden did watch the debate last night. How is he prepping for tonight?
Well, he watched the debate last night from his house with his family in Delaware. He's traveling to Detroit today with his family, and he's going to do last-minute preparations with his team just to make sure he's fully prepared for anything he may come his way. His campaign says, they fully expect him to get attacked tonight because he's the front runner. They fully expect to get attacked on certain issues from certain candidates, but this time they're also going to be really prepared for the unexpected attacks as well.
Yeah, so you guys know from the last debate, Kamala sort of surprised Joe Biden with the busing issue. Zareen, do we expect that to come up again this evening?
I mean, it's so hard to know, right? I've asked her team, I've said, so what's going to be on the T-shirt this time, just jokingly. No one is saying anything about what we can expect from tonight. But again, she's known for these really big moments. But the dynamics on stage this time are going to be far, far different from what they were like last time. Don't forget, last time, she was the only person of color on that entire stage. Tonight, she is one of 5. So those dynamics are going to be really different. In fact, someone calculated the odds of 5 people of color, of all of them being on the same stage, 1.25%. So it's going to be a very different night than it was last time, but we know her to be someone who prepares a lot, so we'll see what she brings.
And you mentioned the T-shirt moment. Biden's campaign has said repeatedly now that they're not looking for a T-shirt moment tonight. They just want to talk about the facts. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and we also know he said that he's not going to be as nice this time. So who knows what dynamics will play out.
All right, so we have Zareen Shah and Chris Donato right there in Detroit with us as well. Thank you guys for joining us. And as you know, ABC News Live will have you covered for tonight's debate. Coverage starts at 7 p.m. Eastern, so don't miss it. And we're moving overseas. North Korea launching 2 ballistic missiles overnight. It's a second weapons test in less than a week. So James Longman is in London with a closer look. James, good to see you. What do we know about this?
Well, as ever, Kimberly, not a huge amount, but the basic facts are 2 ballistic missiles, as you say, launched yesterday into the East Sea towards Japan, traveling about 155 miles out, about 19 miles up in the air, which was quite low, presumably to keep out of, under the radar. But in the last few moments, actually, I've just got some reaction from North Korea. 2 commentaries posted on North Korean state media, talking about why it is that they've done this. And we always talk about joint military exercises that the United States and the South Koreans perform annually. This is something that angers the North Koreans. They view it as a preparation for war. And indeed, this is what the North Koreans reference in this statement. They say the South Koreans persist in kicking up joint military exercises, which the North and South already promised to stop by changing their code names. They say such double-dealing deeds go to clearly prove that the confrontational maniacs remain unchanged in their black-hearted intention to stifle the DPRK by force. So there we have it. Another very kind of colourful comment there from the North Koreans. But, this is all in, quite apart from these individual issues around military exercises and fighter jets, for example, that the United States have been selling to the South Koreans. All these kind of individual examples are not really as important as the wider context of these ongoing nuclear negotiations, which are stalled between the US and the North Koreans. This is North Korea flexing its muscles, saying, we're ready to negotiate, but look what we can do in the meantime.
All right, James, right there in London with the updates on North Korea. Thanks for being with us today. We appreciate that. So, guys, what happens when racist behavior is normalized? And what happens when it's coming from the president of the United States? Well, we've been talking about Baltimore ever since the president launched an attack on the city's representative, Elijah Cummings. This past weekend, he was calling him a brutal bully and saying Baltimore is a disgusting rat and rodent infested mess where no one would want to live. One of many racist comments this president has made. A few weeks back, he used the phrase "go back" when referencing 4 congresswomen of color. So I'm joined by our Zachary Quiche, who just wrote a piece about all of this. Zachary, I want to ask you first, what compelled you to write this?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. As journalists, I think it's our job to unpack things, right? To provide some context and to be in pursuit of the truth. And so that was our initial goal. But there's certainly a history here that we wanted to get into and share with some of our viewers and readers.
Yeah, one of the things that you said in your piece, you talk about that these attacks happen from President Trump when he's specifically criticized. So I think it's interesting because you delve into the history of who in this country is allowed to criticize the president. So I just want you to talk about that.
Yeah, well, I think that Trump has made it clear that he doesn't like to be challenged on so many of these issues. When you look at somebody like what was happening in Baltimore, that started with a stance that he had related to the border, right? And so this was kind of a vicious attack in regards to that. But if you go through history, whether it was Chinese workers, whether it was Irish Catholics, folks in search of some religious freedoms, this has happened throughout history. And certainly black folks have been a part of that conversation too. I think that when you look at some of the other groups, so many of them have been able to assimilate into American society in a way that the African American community has not. And so that we continue to see or to be kind of the target of some of these attacks even today.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's also of note is that President Trump is just making these attacks in public, but the history of racism in the Oval Office has been happening for years.
It has. I mean, this country was founded on racism, or founded on slavery. That is a part of who we are. Now, many scholars were kind of operating from the standpoint that they thought that we were past this in terms of these kind of overt ways of kind of expressing racism. But, the thing about race, the thing about our dynamic here in this country is that racism continues to reinvent itself in ways that allows it to survive. Mm-hmm. And so what we're hearing from scholars is that, this is pretty risky in terms of what the long-term plan is for the Republican Party. They believe that the demographic shifts in this country would have a way of kind of rooting out some of the nativist and racist thoughts and feelings. Now Trump is taking this approach. He feels like it's going to serve him in the short term, but it'll be interesting to see what the long-term implications are for the Republican Party when you see a younger group of voters that don't seem to share these same values.
And I just want to ask you, I mean, how do you think the conversation should go moving forward? I've asked many people this because it's so normalized. It becomes like he said this, she said that, but really we're talking about racist behavior that shouldn't happen at all.
That's a really challenging question. And I think that, those are the things that we're constantly asking ourselves every day. Even when you post an article like this, people approach it and read it from their own entry point, from their own kind of understanding and truth of what, the way that they see the world. And so that's what makes the moment that we're in really, really difficult. But I think the one thing that we can always do is be in pursuit of the truth and be willing to hear the perspectives of people that we might not agree with, but we're talking about issues of compassion and morality and the way that we see each other. That cuts a little bit different than just who you vote for, Republican or Democrat. So I think that's a question that we will continue to explore and hopefully find some common understanding with the foundation of truth.
Absolutely. So if you haven't read Zachary's piece, you should. It's on abcnews.com. It's amazing. So we appreciate you being with us today. And we're going to continue this conversation with Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas. She's one of the reverends with the National Cathedral in D.C. Appreciate you joining us today because you, along with two other reverends, wrote a really powerful piece today in response to President Trump's behavior. So I just want you to tell me about that.
Yes, thank you. It's good to be with you. Bishop Buddy and Dean Hollerith and myself wrote this piece because, first of all, as the nation's cathedral, we see ourselves and people look toward us to be spiritual leaders of this nation as well as moral leaders. And so as we have watched the escalation of racist rhetoric and the way in which it impacts the lives and the culture of a people, we recognize that our silence would be in some ways complicity, send the wrong message, and that this kind of rhetoric stands over and against our very values as people of faith, and of course our very values as a national cathedral. And so we felt compelled to speak out.
Yeah, I read the piece, and one thing that I think is so interesting, you talk about the example where U.S. Army Attorney Joseph Welch in 1954 stood up and asked Joseph McCarthy, who was a senator at the time, have you no sense of decency? And from him asking that, history changed. So it's really powerful for people to speak out, is what you guys are trying to say?
Yes, that's exactly right. And, the question now is our question as a people of this nation, our question as faith leaders. We know we've come to expect certain kind of vitriol coming from the highest office of this land. The question for us is, what do we expect of ourselves? And do we have any decency? When is enough enough? When do we begin to take control of the narrative, to change the narrative, and to articulate our very values, which is that every single solitary human being in this country is sacred. Every single solitary human being, period, that has breath or ever has had breath is sacred, and they deserve to be treated as such. That's what we stand for. And so it is our responsibility to lift the narrative, to lift this country to its higher angels, if you will. And so the responsibility is ours. We may not be responsible for what others may say, but we certainly are responsible for what we say and do. And as faith leaders, we need to be the ones to step in the breach and lead our nation forward to a different place.
All right, we have Reverend Canon Kelly Brown Douglas joining us from D.C. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes. And guys, we move on to the ongoing humanitarian crisis at the border. A new ACLU report, nearly 1,000 children have been separated from their parents at the border. This comes after the government ordered the family separations to stop over a year ago. So ACLU lawyers bringing this information in a hearing yesterday. And I want to bring in Astrid Dominguez, who is the director of ACLU Border Rights Center. So Astrid, I just want to ask you, how is it possible that you have this amount of separations that have happened after it was ordered to stop?
Yes, so as yesterday was mentioned, the separations have continued to happen. CBP, in this case Border Patrol, had taken a narrow category and has continued the separation. So what it had agreed was that if the parent had represented a particular danger for the child, that the family could potentially be separated. Now the government has taken that situation, and it has been separating when in minor instances, such as the parent had been accused of like a minor offense. So what we've been discovering along with our partners is that these separations have continued to happen, and it's almost 1,000 children that have been separated.
It's pretty unbelievable. Can you just tell us what else was notable in the report that you guys put out?
Yes. So, this category of parents or with this situation is like the minor offenses or crimes, as they call it. So this is obviously causing an impact in in tender age children. So before June 26, when the judge ordered for the separations to stop, 5% of the children that were separated were younger than 10 years old, and now that has been it has had an increase of 20%. So what we're seeing is that younger children are the ones that have been separated from their parents. Another example, if a parent that wasn't able to speak to the agent because of a language barrier, they took away their child. So this like narrow category, CBP is exploiting it in order to continue the family separations.
Okay, so Mark Morgan, he's the new acting chief of the CBP. He also testified yesterday defending what happens at the border. So take a listen to this.
The men and women of CBP are not running concentration camps, making those in our custody drink from toilets, nor denying them access to toothbrushes. That is simply not true. This is the kind of irresponsible rhetoric that they have to endure from both the media and even some of our own congressional leaders. It's unjust and does nothing to bring us closer to resolving one of the most divisive issues that we face in our country. The demonizing of law enforcement professionals must stop.
So how do you respond to hearing him saying that everything the reports have been saying is not true?
Well, there's 2 OIG reports that have showed the conditions in those facilities, both in the RGV and the Rio Grande Valley in Texas and in El Paso. This is an intentional strategic crisis created by Border Patrol. CBP has the authority to release people, and they often claim ICE doesn't have space. But let's also remember that ICE is opting to have people detained. So they're not paroling individuals. So therefore, they're taking up bed space. So there isn't any need for more bed space, and Border Patrol can release people. They have that authority. So what Border Patrol has now done, this is a deterrence, deterrence to cruelty. Really what they're trying to do is make it as awful so that way people stop coming. But these are asylum seekers. What Border Patrol is not doing is trying their best to process people and treat people in a humane way. When you have 900 people in one facility, there isn't any way to treat them and or have them in your custody in a humane way. Border Patrol, CBP has a very big budget. They have almost $70 million, and they don't have the will to actually treat people in a humane way and process them in a humane way. They should be hiring child welfare professionals and experts that can come into the facilities and help them with this population. Now, the people that are arriving to our border are asylum seekers. These are families and unaccompanied children. Yes, Border Patrol agents, our Border Patrol agents should not be taking care of these children, but they should be then outsourcing this, the processing and the care for those children and those families in their custody. And they should not be detaining them just as a deterrence method.
All right, Astrid Dominguez, we appreciate everything. Director of ACLU Border Rights Center, thanks for being with us today. And guys, we're going to try to turn to a little bit of happier news. If your parents ever told you to put down the video games and go outside, here's a rebuttal. Just say $3 million. That's how much one teen took home after winning the Fortnite World Championships over the weekend. More than Tiger Woods made after winning the Masters. So gaming is a big money business, and our next guests are proving it isn't just for the guys. Forming the first all-girls varsity eSports team in the country at Hathaway Brown School. I want to bring in Coach Jay Collins, and we also have team member Juliana Renix. Hi, guys. Good to see you. First, want to ask you, yeah, hello. First, wanted to ask you, why was it so important to you to form an all-girls team?
Well, Hathaway Brown is an all-girls school, and so we were really excited about bringing esports here because of some of the assumptions. Now, girls actually play a lot of games. About 45% of gamers are women, according to the Entertainment Software Association. But sometimes they're just not visible. And so having an esports team here made that more visible. We're happy about that.
I think it's amazing. And Juliana, what was the reaction when you tell people that you're on this varsity team, which implies that you're one of the best?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
Yeah, I was saying, what is people's reaction when you tell them that you are such the dopest girl in the school on this varsity gaming team?
Most people at school aren't too impressed by it, but I'd say my friends and family, they're very happy for me, and they think that it's pretty cool, at least.
They're not impressed by it now, but they will be when you're bringing home the bucks. So what do you guys think is the future of esports in this country? Jay Collins, Jay, the coach, what do you think is the future?
I think that schools are going to start investing in this more in the same way that they invest in athletics. You see a lot of schools building stadiums for football, basketball. When you're talking about investing in esports, you're talking about investing in educational technology infrastructure, increasing bandwidth at school, buying new computers. And I think that's really important because it can be actually double purpose, used both for esports as well as for regular academics. So it makes for really good synergy at schools.
And Juliana, before we go, let's just say you're on an island, you have one game. What is it?
Splatoon 2.
Amazing. You were ready for that one. You were ready. So you both, thanks for joining us today. Kudos to what you're doing. I think it's fantastic.
All right, thanks so much.
Thanks.
And guys, before we go, a special edition of the Briefing Room coming to you today live from Detroit, and our Devin Dwyer is right there. Devin, what's on tap?
Hey, Kimberly. Yeah, tonight is night 2 of this debate doubleheader in Detroit. Joe Biden center stage, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris will flank him. We expect race to be a hot topic tonight after those 2 African-American senators went after Joe Biden, his civil rights record. Also, healthcare, immigration expected to be hot topics tonight. We're still analyzing the first debate night. Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders fielding the attacks from those moderates on stage. We'll have much more analysis, who won, who lost, coming up on the Briefing Room. We'll also bring you some stories from Macomb County. We're here in the state's 3rd largest county. This is the county in Michigan that delivered the 2016 election to Donald Trump. It voted twice for Barack Obama in 2008, 2016, largely because of those white working class voters. We had breakfast here, visited a farm stand, talked to people about how they're feeling about things right now. We'll bring you some of those interesting, some fascinating insights ahead of the 2020 election. Kimberly?
All right. Thank you, Devin. And again, you guys can watch that special edition of the Briefing Room at 3:30 p.m. today. Don't miss it, and our live coverage of the debate tonight. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
ABC News.